On the evening of October 11th, 1973, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker reported to the sheriff's office in Jackson County, Mississippi. During a polygraph test, the duo claimed they were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River when they heard a weird zipping sound. They jolted to their feet at the sight of two flashing blue lights, and just then, they observed an oval-shaped hovering object, almost 30 to 40 feet across and 8 to 10 feet high. Hixon and Parker believed they were conscious, but paralyzed, while three creatures with no neck and coarse skin took them aboard the hovercraft and subjected them to an examination. Here's the thing, they passed the polygraph. So what exactly happened to Hickson and Parker, and how did they survive the incident? This is one of the most popular UFO cases in American history. The truth is, Hickson and fishing buddy Calvin Parker walked into the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and told the kind of story nobody wants to believe. It made news around the world. The headlines read, "Two Mississippi men abducted by floating creatures from a strange spaceship." The two men were among the first to report a growing trend, alleged human abduction by aliens. Strangely, the victims often claim these aliens seem only interested in taking them into a spaceship for some sort of physical examination. Going back half a century, UFO sightings were relatively rare, with only about a dozen reported cases. In stark contrast, the number of reported cases has skyrocketed to over 500,000 in 2024. Mississippi's most notorious abduction case began early in the evening on October 11th, 1973, a year when numerous UFO sightings were reported across the nation. This is what is called a UFO flap. However, both men have an interesting backstory. Hickson was a seasoned supervisor at Walker & Sons shipyard, where he had hired Calvin Parker Jr., the 19-year-old son of his longtime friend. As a result, Hickson was both Parker's boss and landlord, since Parker rented a room from Hickson and his wife in Gautier. As a 42-year-old Korean War veteran, Hickson had faced his share of battles, while Parker, a young welder from Jones County, was just starting life. He had moved for work and wanted to save up before getting married. On that fateful day, the duo decided to go fishing on the East River. Shortly after dusk, Hickson had gotten a catch and was reeling in his line when he heard a strange noise behind him. It was like a hissing or buzzing sound, he said. I turned around and there was some sort of craft hovering a foot above the ground. It had flashing blue lights, like a police car. A door opened and there was a bright light coming from inside. Three creatures floated down. They didn't have toes, but they had feet shape. Hickson went further, claiming the creatures lifted him through the air, without force, into the spaceship, and he couldn't resist them. During the interview, the captain asked how many eyes these creatures had. Hickson responded that there could have been eyes, but he didn't see any.
We pulled up and I noticed there was postage signs there. And I said, Charlie, you know, maybe we don't need to go fishing here. He said, no, that's fine. And that's when I noticed some blue hazy lights reflecting, coming across from my back, out across the water. So I stood up thinking that I was going to go to jail.
The pair reported being paralyzed, except for their eyes, and being floated into the open door. Inside, the space was bright and featureless. Both described being examined with an electronic eye and receiving telepathic reassurances not to be afraid.
Creatures coming toward us, and they was probably 4.5, 5 foot tall. They built like football players, but I noticed they kind of moved mechanical-wise, and they was floating off the ground. By the time we stood up and turned around, they was there on us all at one time. So two of them got a hold of Charlie. One of them got a hold of myself, and instantly I felt like that I just got relaxed.
Parker claims he and Hickson were levitated into the spacecraft.
There was an examination room, what I call it, and the old big ugly creature that brought me in, he took me and laid me on an examination table, and he just backed up out of the way. I couldn't move or anything. All I could do was look, and there was something about the size of a deck of cards that came out of the ceiling, and it hovered about a foot in front of my eyes, and then it went to the right side of my head, and it clicked, went behind my head, and it clicked, went to the left side of my head and clicked, and then straight to the front, and then it shot back up in the ceiling. And that's when I noticed some kind of little ruffling noise, and this more feminine looking creature came out. She looked completely different than the what I call the robot, because he moved like a robot, just mechanical wise. She looked kind of feminine looking and had fingers, regular fingers and all, come over and pinched me on the side of the cheek. And then she took her finger and run down my throat and got behind that little thing that hangs down back there and tried to come up in my nasal cavity. And that was when it started hurting and I started choking and I got scared. And she just kind of telepathically told me, you know, don't be afraid.
Hickson later described a feeling of helplessness, saying, "These things held me while the eye scanned my whole body." The beings moved him to check him in different positions. Parker reported a smaller fourth being with big eyes that looked more human-like, which he speculated had communicated with him. In the interview, Hickson stated, "I couldn't tell how much time had passed. Maybe half an hour, maybe an hour and a half. The light was everywhere, flowing from the ceilings, walls, and floor. When I was finally released, I found Parker standing in a trance-like state at the river's edge, his arms stretched out in front of him. He was clearly in a state of shock. Moments later, the object shot straight up into the air and vanished from sight."
Sitting on the other side of the pier with our feet, you know, over toward the river, fishing in the river. And the fish still wasn't biting, so I told Calvin, I said, well, you know, we might as well go home. But I guess that was when I heard it. It was some kind of zipping sound. And when I turned around, in this area out here, about 40 or 50 feet out there, it was some kind of craft, you know. It looked like it's going to come right onto the ground. But it came on down and hovered about a foot and a half or 2 feet off of the ground. We didn't know what to do, you know. The river behind us and that out there, not knowing what it was. So, and then before we had time to really do anything, it seemed like an open appeared. Toward the end, it was, you know, toward us. And the blue light, it had blue flashing lights as it was, you know, approaching the ground, but then they went out. And when the opening appeared, some source of light came from the inside. It was just all, of course, we could see them in the opening coming from, you know, when it started out to craft. But
Did you think it was people coming out at first?
Well, they had. I kind of thought it was people at first, you know, off like that. But of course, when they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
What did you see?
Well, they were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. Their head, it seemed to come directly to their shoulders. And they had something, it came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side, the ears. And I believe that they looked like they were a little longer on the ears than the nose. But still, me, when they came out that doorway, or that opening or whatever it was, then just almost instantly, they were right there on us. And their arms, they had arms, and I saw the arm moving here and in the shoulders. But they had webbed, I mean, their fingers were webbed, and then they had something like a thumb.
As you can imagine, both men left the pier and decided they had to report it to someone. Hickson called the Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi, but they said they didn't handle that sort of thing anymore. You see, prior to that, Kessler Air Force Base had been involved in various projects, such as Project Blue Book, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and the popular UFO incident in Roswell. This is a timeline of events from July 1947. The Roswell incident occurs with an unknown flying object crashing on a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico, 1947 to 1949. Project Sign is initiated to gather and analyze UFO sighting reports. 1949 to 1952. Project Grudge follows, with a more skeptical approach to UFO sightings. 1952 to 1969. Project Blue Book is established to study UFO sightings and determine if they pose a threat to national security. And October 11th, 1973. Hixon and Parker report their UFO encounter and alien abduction experience to the Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi, but the sergeant on base told them to report the case to the sheriff. Hickson and Parker were skeptical at first. Imagine walking into a lawman's office, and the first thing you say is, "I was just captured by aliens." So, they decided to drive to the local newspaper office to speak to a reporter, but the office happened to be closed. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker felt they had no alternative than to speak with the sheriff. Well, they did, and a squad car came to get them. Now, Hickson said he told the sheriff, Fred Diamond, not to publicize the incident, but word got leaked anyway, and the very next day, Wagner Shipyard was flooded with phone calls from the media. 3 things are certain after listening to Hickson and Parker's story. To begin with, the 2 men were frantic as they reported what they had witnessed to the police. It was as if they had seen something they shouldn't have. Each man had a puncture wound in one arm, and strangely, both men passed the polygraph tests. That last statement leaves more questions than answers. If they passed the polygraphs, doesn't that mean they were telling the truth? After the sheriff listened to their story, he put Hickson and Parker in a room wired for sound. His belief was that if he left the 2 men alone in the room, they would reveal their hoax. The men had this conversation privately after the interview. Not too long after, the press picked up the story, and the Pascagoula encounter was major news all over the country. In January 1952, Jim and Coral founded an organization in Arizona to investigate aerial sightings and sent University of California engineering professor James Harder to Mississippi to conduct an investigation. Flash backwards to that Thursday night. Hickson and Parker arrived at the sheriff's office and were interviewed by Glenn Ryder and Fred Diamond.
Sheriff Diamond, can you tell me just what happened that night?
No, sir, I can't. All I can tell you is there was 2 men came into the sheriff's department approximately 8:30 and 9 o'clock. They were all excited, upset, wanting to climb the walls, hysterical, crying. That's actually all I know is what happened. I mean, as far as me seeing what happened, I don't know. They linked. And then we left the room and recorded all the conversation they had. Recorded between the 2 of them. And one of them kept wanting to pray. And he said, after all I went through on this earth, he said, why should I have to see something like this?
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook.
How about the lie detector test?
Well, so that was run by Pilkington. Was it Pilkington?
Pennington.
Pennington.
That they run this type of test about 6 times a day. And when they were asked to come over here to talk to these people, they had in their mind that it was just a big joke. And if I understand it correctly, they ran one test on Mr. Hixon. The machine showed that he was telling the truth. Then they run another one. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the 3rd test, and he believed just what Mr. Hixon.
After the incident, there were 2 different reactions. You see, Hixon would tell the story to anyone who wanted to listen, at church, social gatherings, and the like. But Parker is the young man who walked away from notoriety. Reports claim he traveled home to work on the oil fields with his new wife, and he later claimed that anytime he got recognized, he'd leave the job. He wanted to earn a good living and live a normal life. His life had suddenly turned into anything but. According to the law officers, Parker's reaction was what convinced them that something had happened. In the background, deputies could hear Parker begging Hixon, "Don't talk to them, Charlie. Those people will come back and get us. They don't want us to talk." Parker believes he was drugged by a mechanical creature. There was a puncture in his arm where something grasped onto him. Parker was overwhelmed by fear and anxiety, worried that he might have been infected by aliens or exposed to radiation that could harm others, and frustrated by what he saw as a rushed and sloppy investigation into the incident.
We were sitting there fishing, and I heard a noise and turned around and looked and seen some blue lights, some hazy blue lights. And that's when, the craft landed behind us. We still wasn't for sure what it was, but it landed, and we turned around and the front of it opened up, and when it did, it was just like we were paralyzed there. He couldn't move and I couldn't move, but there's three robot-looking creatures that floated out. They didn't walk, they just kind of glided out of the craft and come over, and two got a hold of me and one got a hold of Charlie, and they took us inside. They did an examination, so when they examined us, we was probably in there, I'm going to say 45 minutes. I'm not real sure. I didn't have a watch or nothing at the time. They put us back out at the same place we were, facing the water, and I was froze.
Reports later indicated that Harder hypnotized Hixon, but the sessions were terminated when Hixon became too frightened to continue. By Sunday night, the news teams had left Pascagoula, Dr. Hynek, and Dr. Harder had returned to their homes in Chicago and Berkeley. The whole country was now aware of Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker's incredible experience. This was a strange time to be in Pascagoula, similar to arriving at a disaster scene. The town was still trying to process what had happened. Even the toughest people, like the sheriffs, were struggling to come to terms with it. This interview was special because it was recorded just hours after their encounter with the flashing blue light, marking the first time witnesses' testimony had been captured so promptly in a major UFO case. Another reporter stated, "I had seen them in person, and they were clearly on the edge of collapse. They had gone through something that no one could have prepared them for." On the 30th of October, 1973, the sheriff ordered a 2.5-hour polygraph test given by a New Orleans firm. After the test, the agent that conducted the polygraph signed a statement saying, "It is my opinion that Charles Hickson told the truth about the following things." He believes he saw a spaceship. He believes he was taken into the spaceship and saw space creatures. The higher-ups appeared to be going to great lengths to poke holes in Hixon and Parker's story, but this wouldn't be the first time something like this had been reported. On the contrary, there had been multiple reports and sightings over a short period, including the popular Betty and Barney Hill story. The couple claimed they were abducted, but it took a while for their story to become mainstream. However, Hixon and Parker told their story, and it blew up overnight. Within weeks, Hixon was on Johnny Carson and Dick Cavett late-night talk shows. Much later, Hixon appeared on an episode of To Tell the Truth on 20th of November, 1973.
So keeping in mind that all three of the gentlemen across from us claim to be Charles Hickson, who has had actual contact with beings from beyond the solar system, let's start the questioning with Orson Bean.
Thank you, Zog. Number one, after the beings floated you back to where you'd been fishing, did you catch anything?
Not very much.
No. Number two, a lie detector test successfully passed simply indicates that you believe what you're saying, right? Not necessarily what you're saying is true. Isn't that correct? I meant to say number three. Is that right?
As far as I'm concerned, it's true.
Yeah, but that's what a polygraph test proves, is that you believe you're telling the truth. Not that you are, in fact, telling the truth, but that you believe yourself to be telling the truth, correct?
I suppose so.
Number two, was there any language communication in this whole examination of you? Did you say anything to them, or did they say anything to you?
No, I yelled, and there was a buzzing. There was kind of a buzzing sound.
I see. Number one, what kind of force was exerted on you? Did you have the power to resist or to restrain yourself, or was you sort of hypnotized?
I didn't have any power to resist, no.
I see. When they floated you back, what did they float you back in or on?
They themselves had hold of me.
But I mean, what kept you in suspension?
We have 2 votes for number 1, and we have 1 vote for number 2 and 1 vote for number 3. So they're in. Will the real Charles Hickson please stand up?
Another week passed, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Department logged more than 2,000 calls. Imagine if news of an alien abduction broke in 2024. Every YouTuber and Twitter bot would be covering the topic. The matter caused a stir for a few months, then died down, and occasionally comes up again. Here's the question: did it happen or not? Many people seem to be believing Hickson's story, as a large number of witnesses have come forward to support his claims. A few years after the incident, Captain Glenn Ryder said there were sightings of an unexplained flash of light reported on the night it happened, but he did not include those in the office police reports. Another witness has come forward to share her account of a sighting that occurred approximately 2 months after Hixon and Parker's incident, but has chosen to remain anonymous. Sometime in December, she was standing outside her car at a gas station near Market Street in Pascagoula when she and others saw an object fly over them. She said, and I quote, "It was about 8 p.m. For some reason I was facing north and I saw something on my left. We all looked. It was just above the tree line and disappeared when it reached the beach. It lasted 3 to 4 seconds, but in that time, the object had traveled more than a mile. We just looked at each other and resumed what we were doing." On October 21st, 2001, Natalie Chambers of the Associated Press reported that a new witness to the Pascagoula incident had recently surfaced. Chambers identified this individual as Mike Cataldo, a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer. According to Cataldo, earlier that night in 1973, he and his companions, Ted Peralta and Mac Hanna, left their workplace and drove west towards Biloxi. While driving, they saw some strange light in the sky. At first, they thought it was a shooting star moving from right to left, but then it descended into a marshy area lined with trees and hovered there for about 30 seconds. The object was spinning and had blinking lights around its edge, arranged in a circular pattern, similar to how you would tape lights to a cake pan. Cataldo confirmed that the object had a clear structure, which he described as a whitish-gray hat-shaped object. It was less than half a mile away and appeared as large as a big American airliner. Then, it suddenly shot away and vanished. Another theory that would support Hixon and Parker's claim is that there's an awful lot of UFO encounters with popular mentions such as the Roswell incident, where a strange object crashed on a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. The government initially reported finding a flying disc, but later claimed it was just a weather balloon. People believed they were covering up evidence of extraterrestrial life. Betty and Barney Hill's abduction story is another mind-boggle. This New Hampshire couple claimed they were driving home from a vacation in 1961 when they were stopped by a UFO. They reported being taken on board, examined by alien beings, and even communicating with them through telepathy. In 1973, a National Guard helicopter crew, led by Captain Lawrence Coyne, had a harrowing encounter with a UFO. There were also bizarre reports of UFO landings, with beings coming out to collect samples of local flora and fauna. These cases are particularly fascinating, as they suggest a curious, scientific interest in our planet. Were these extraterrestrial visitors studying our world? Nevertheless, some people didn't think these incidents were mysterious or anything of that nature, but rather a hoax. Among those people were Philip Klass and Joe Nickel. Way back in 1973, famed UFO skeptic Klass noted flaws in Hickson's account of his story. Klass recalled an instance where Hixon would refer to the creatures as having a hole for a mouth, but later calling it a slit. Klass also pointed out that the lie detector test was conducted by an inexperienced polygraph operator. and that Hickson also refused to take another test conducted by an expert police examiner. In some later reports, class found that Hickson had once been fired for improperly obtaining money from employees under his supervision and concluded the case was a ruse. But was that enough evidence to conclude? Keep in mind, there had been several reports of sightings prior and after the incident in Pascagoula. If it wasn't a genuine alien abduction or a hoax, then what was it? Perhaps it was neither, said Joe Nickel in his hypothesis. Nickel suggested that the two men who might have been drinking before the incident dozed off and could have entered an hypnagogic state. Additionally, this state may be accompanied by sleep paralysis. Hickson also said that aliens paralyzed him before carrying him aboard the UFO in what sounds like a dream fantasy, which validated Joe Nickel's claims. This theory seemed the most plausible, as Hickson's later description of aliens speaking in his head is another telltale of hypnagogia. This would also prove why the men kept to their story during the secret recording. Still, some of Hickson's behavior was questionable, according to Nixial. He kept adding to his story. As a month later, Hickson claimed the interior lights of the UFO had been so intense as to cause eye injury lasting for days. But an extensive hospital examination the day after the incident showed no eye damage reports. However, this theory would directly contrast eyewitness reports prior to the famous incident, such as with Mike Cataldo, who didn't even know Hixon and Parker.
Okay, well, we were kind of like parked right there where my car is, and we were in a 69 GTO, and we were waiting on the captain of the boat, crew boat, to come out because he was going out on the boat, but he was delayed getting here because of him, for some reason. I don't remember what it was, but anyway, so we decided to just sit in the car and wait it out, and it went from daylight, it started getting dark in the afternoon, and that's went over in that west direction, right back over in that way. That bridge there wasn't there. And I've noticed a blue light come up in the sky over there, and then I seen it start going. It was following the riverbank, the river here, and it would go so far down, and then it would turn around, and it would come back. And it wouldn't get past from where they were abducted, Parker and Hickman. And so, and then it would go back, and it did that several times, and then sometimes it would just sit there. And then finally I didn't see it anymore.
Oddly, government officials didn't show much interest. But Hixson was convinced this UFO came from another world, and was surprised by the number of people who accepted that as logical. Prior to that evening in October, he hadn't given much thought to the existence of aliens. I don't see why God would put life on just this one small speck and no other place. He said he plans to make a recording of his story. Meanwhile, nights are long and sleep is uneasy. I wake up every 3 or 4 hours, sometimes in a cold sweat, said Hickson. I don't know what is terrifying me. Maybe I'm reliving what happened. I know I always have the feeling there's something important that I just can't remember, no matter how hard I try. Charles Hickson passed on September 9th, 2011, at the age of 80 due to a heart attack, and Calvin Parker on August 24th, 2023, due to kidney cancer. He was 68. Both men's stories never changed.